right, so let's pick up where we left off. You know, we were talking about three arguments for the existence of God. We went through a couple of arguments that deal with scientific evidence, the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, and there's a lot more than what we could even cover verbally here. But now, let's talk about the moral argument, and this might be the most relevant in today's culture. Because, you know, you can ignore the beginning and design. It's really difficult to ignore morality because you deal with it every day. And particularly among the young have a very developed sense of justice. The problem is, if there is no God, there is no justice. And we'll see why here in a minute. In fact, maybe the best way to try and communicate the relevance of God to morality is to ask you this question. How do you know your quarterback throwing a touchdown is better than your quarterback throwing a pick six? That's when he throws it to the other team and they take it back for the touchdown. How do you know that? This is the interactive portion of the program.
The rules of the game are defined.
The rules, not just the rules. The what?
The goal.
Say it again.
The goals of the game are
Close. Yeah, you got to know the purpose of the game. If you don't know the purpose, you can't say this is a good play and this is a bad play, because you can't say that this play gets us closer to the purpose while this play takes us further away, unless you know what the purpose is. If there's no purpose, there's no good or bad. They're just different. And the same thing is true when it comes to morality. If there's no purpose to life, you can't say this is a good way to live because it gets you closer to the purpose, and this is a bad way to live because it takes you further away. Now, notice that the purpose of the game comes from outside the game. It doesn't matter what, you could talk about hockey, the same kind of thing. The purpose comes from outside the game. Now, in football, who makes up the purpose? The teams don't make up the purpose. They just show up and play. The purpose comes from outside the game. In this case, it would be the NFL commissioner and the competition committee among the teams, and they come up with the purpose and the rules, and every once in a while they tweak the rules and they change year to year. Why? Because the rules of football are arbitrary. They could be different. Now, in life, the rules come from outside the game, and the purpose comes from outside the game as well. But the rules are not arbitrary because they're based on the nature of God. And so when you look outside of this life, you have to look above to figure out why we're even here. If there is no God, as even atheists will admit, there is no purpose. And if there is no purpose, there is no right or wrong. Yet all of you know that torturing babies for fun is really wrong. All of you know the Holocaust was really wrong. All of you know that certain practices, whether it be rape or stealing, you know that's really wrong. If that's the case, there must be something really right outside of yourself. In fact, another way of looking at this is to ask the question, how can you discover who's right and who's wrong, Mother Teresa or Hitler? For those of you that don't know, Mother Teresa was the Catholic nun who spent most of her life serving the poor in Calcutta, India. And of course, Hitler, the murderous dictator of World War II. How could you tell who's closer to the truth? Well, let me ask you a question this way. How do you know which map of Scotland is better? Is it map A or map B? What's the only way you could know? What would you need to see? Yeah, you would need to see a real unchanging place called Scotland. If Scotland doesn't exist, then these two maps are meaningless. But since Scotland does exist, we could see that map A, while it's not perfect, is a better representation of the real Scotland than is map B. In other words, there's a standard outside of the two maps by which you can judge them, by which you can measure them. And that's exactly what we do when we compare Mother Teresa and Hitler. Mother Teresa wasn't the standard. Hitler wasn't the standard. There's a standard beyond both of them by which we measure both of them. And Mother Teresa measured up to the standard better than did Hitler. If that standard didn't exist, you couldn't say one was better than another. What is the standard? God's nature. God is the standard of righteousness. So any deviation from that would be what we would call evil. In fact, if there is no God, the Nazis were not wrong. I was in a debate a number of years ago with the president of the American Atheists. His name was David Silverman. So ethnically, he's Jewish, but he's an atheist. And during the debate, I kept pressing him on this question. I said, David, if there is no God, the Nazis were not really wrong. How do you account for that? And he kept trying to avoid the question. And then he finally admitted at one point, he said, Frank, you're right. The Holocaust wasn't really wrong. And everybody gasped. And I said, David, you know with more certainty that the Holocaust was wrong than you know that atheism is true. So why would you ever say that atheism is true and the Holocaust wasn't really wrong? I mean, you know with more certainty that the Holocaust is wrong than you have any way of knowing that there is no God. Your moral intuition already tells you it's wrong. So why would you ever come to an atheistic conclusion? You can't justify it on atheism. Now, let me be clear here. I'm not saying that atheists don't know right and wrong. They do. I'm not saying atheists can't be good people. They can. What I'm saying is they can't justify what good or evil is unless God exists. It would be like saying, you could be driving down the highway here and you see that the speed limit's 100 kilometers an hour, right? And you can know what that sign says, and you can obey that sign even if you deny there's a traffic authority. However, that sign would not exist unless there was a traffic authority. The same thing is true with any moral issue. You can know, say, murder is wrong, and not murder, but murder wouldn't be wrong unless God existed. You can say, I know murder's wrong, I can be a good person and not murder people, and deny there's a God, but there would be no thou shalt not murder unless there was a God. Are you guys with me on this? And even atheists will admit this, by the way. So he really bit the bullet and he tried to say the Nazis were not wrong. You know, we haven't had many of our YouTube videos censored. We've had a few, but the first one we ever had censored was this one because of what he said, not because of what I said. When he said the Holocaust wasn't really wrong, they said, nope, we're not going to tolerate that. And it was an atheist saying it. If there is no God, there are no human rights. Everything's just a matter of opinion. It's just your opinion against somebody else's opinion. By the way, I've noticed in our country and your country, we seem to be creating rights every 10 minutes. You notice that? But many of these people who are creating these rights, they're atheists. And they don't seem to realize that unless God exists, there are no rights. Everything is just a matter of opinion. There's not only no right to life, or I should say it another way, there's not only no right to an abortion, there's no right to life. There's not only no right to same-sex marriage, there's no right to natural marriage. There are no trans rights, there are no gay rights, there are no Christian rights, there are no human rights, because rights can only come from God. You don't get rights from your government. If you got them from your government, that would mean that a new government comes in and they say these aren't rights anymore, you no longer have them. No, they would be preferences then. You have rights regardless of what anybody says about them. That's the point. So your government doesn't give you your rights. Your government may recognize those rights or trample those rights, but they don't give them to you. Rights only exist if God exists. If there is no God, murder, slavery, and racism are not wrong. Yet we all know these things are wrong. So there must be a standard of right by which we judge these things to be wrong. If there is no God, Christians have never done anything wrong. Now, those of you who are either not Christians or those of you who know people who are not Christians, what's the biggest objection that non-Christians give against Christians? You guys are hypocrites. Now, when somebody says that, you know what you ought to say? You're right. And secondly, you've just given evidence for God. Why? What's wrong with hypocrisy if there is no God? You've just called me on hypocrisy, which implies that hypocrisy is wrong. But hypocrisy can only be wrong if God exists. But yes, I am a hypocrite. Now, John Dixon, who is a philosopher or historian actually, who teaches at Wheaton College now, used to be from Australia, asks people who think, I can't be a Christian. Look at all those hypocrites. He says this. He asks such people, when somebody plays Beethoven poorly, who do you blame? Who do you blame? Yeah, you don't blame Beethoven. You blame the player. So when somebody plays Jesus poorly, you don't blame Jesus. Look, just because I'm not true and beautiful doesn't mean Jesus isn't true and beautiful. I'm fallen. I need a Savior. In fact, if I was perfect, I wouldn't need Jesus. In fact, did I mention this yet? Maybe I haven't. Do you know that you can get to heaven by being good? Did you know that? Yeah, you can. You just got to be perfect your whole life. Too late for me. How about you? We wouldn't need a Savior if we were perfect. We only need a Savior because we're fallen. That's the problem. We are all fallen. In fact, I mentioned I had some debates with Christopher Hitchens, which you can see on our YouTube channel, and he wrote the book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. Now, this word poison is actually a fun way of saying religion's evil. And much of what he says in the book is true, that religious people have done a lot of evil things. And so during the debate, I said, Christopher, I agree with a lot of what you've written in your book, but you're kind of proving our worldview. You're saying religious people have done evil things, and we agree. But my question to you is, what's your standard for even knowing what evil is? Because if there is no God, nothing's good or bad. Now, he would never answer the question. He would just avoid the question. Because outside of a standard of good, nothing's evil. It's just your opinion. And we'll see here in a minute that evil doesn't disprove God. It actually shows God does exist. In fact, at one point during the debate, I said to him, Christopher, I'm a hypocrite. I can't live up to what Jesus told me to do. But if I did, I wouldn't need him. In fact, when people say I can't go to church because there's too many hypocrites down there, I always say, come on down, pal. We got room for one more. That's what the church is. It's a hospital for sinners. It's not a country club for saints. To say I can't go to church because there's too many hypocrites down there would be like saying I can't go to the gym because there's too many out-of-shape people down there. Well, that's why they're there, to get in shape. Of course. Yes, we come here to worship God, but we also come here to get sanctified. And so, yeah, you ought to expect a lot of broken people in church. But that doesn't disprove God. That actually shows God does exist. And oh, by the way, religion doesn't poison everything. Everything poisons religion. I poison religion because I don't live up to the pure words of Christ. Hey, newsflash, Christianity is not Christians. Christianity is Jesus. Keep your eyes on Jesus. We do all sorts of evil stuff. It's interesting, John Dixon also said this. He said, during the Middle Ages, Christians did a lot of evil. In fact, they used to torture people who were not believers. But then he said this. He said, the Romans and the Greeks were torturing people long before Jesus ever came. When Christians started to torture people, they were just being human like everybody else. But it was only the Christians that did charity, that built hospitals, that built universities. Yes, we have done evil, but usually it's the Christians and only the Christians that did all that good. By the way, if there is no God, tolerance is never good. Did you know that? Why? Because there is no such thing as good if there's no God. And by the way, are Christians commanded to be tolerant? Be careful. Be careful. Don't answer too quickly. What does tolerance mean? Putting up with? Should you put up with everything? No, Christians are not commanded to be tolerant. Christians are commanded to love. You see, tolerance is too weak. Tolerance says hold your nose and put up with them. Love says reach out and help them. And that means that there are times when you can't tolerate what people do because that would be unloving. In fact, we're going to talk about this in tomorrow's worship session. We're going to be talking about, does love require approval? Let me just give you a 2-minute overview of that. How many people in here are parents? All right, how many people in here are former children? Okay, good, that's everyone. Question. If your parent approved of everything you wanted to do when you were 13, would that have been a loving parent? No, you can't approve of everything a kid wants to do. That wouldn't be loving, that would be unloving. You'd be enabling them to do evil. You need to stand in the way of evil if you're gonna love somebody. Paul says in the passage that everybody reads at their wedding, but nobody obeys. 1 Corinthians 13, he says, love always protects. Love always perseveres. Love does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but love rejoices in the truth. If you want to love somebody, you have to stand in the way of the evil they want to do. Otherwise, you're an enabler. That's false compassion. That's not true and good. In fact, Jesus gave us one new command. What's the one new command? Love one another as I have loved you. How did he love us? He sacrificed himself for us. How are we supposed to love others? We're supposed to sacrifice ourselves for others. But you know what we do? We do the opposite. Let's just talk the sexual issues right now because they're really big in our culture. When we tell people what they want to hear, we're not helping them, we're helping ourselves. Why? Because we don't want to tell them the truth. If we tell them the truth, they'll get mad at us. So we tell them what they want to hear so they're not mad at us. Who are we helping? Yeah, we're just helping ourselves so people don't get mad at us. It was Thomas Sowell, who, by the way, he's 93 years old now. He says everything well. He said this: when you want to help people, you tell them the truth. When you want to help yourself, you tell them what they want to hear. And that's what we tend to do. We tell people what they want to hear so they don't get mad at us. Our job is to sacrifice ourselves to help people. That means we'll take all of the consternation they give us when we stand for the truth. We're not going to acquiesce and say, oh, honey, what you're doing is just fine. No, it's not. And if you're trying to say it is, by what standard are you judging it's a good thing? Turns out that so many people who use words like equality and love and fairness and equity are all stealing from God while they're arguing against him. Those things didn't exist in ancient Rome or Greece. Even consent during sex, they didn't think that was necessary. All of these so-called Christian virtues that came from Jesus, some people are trying to take in order to do something Jesus doesn't want them to do, but they cover it up with these nice-sounding words like equality, like reproductive justice, like equity. By the way, what's the difference between equality and equity? Equality means that everybody has equal opportunity by the law. Equity means everybody has the same outcome. You're not even going to get equity in heaven. Not everyone's going to have the same thing in heaven. Do you know Jesus' parable of the talents? You know that whole parable, right? Where the guy who has the most, he actually puts his talents to work and he makes more, and the guy that just has one buries it. What does Jesus do to the guy who just has one? He takes that talent and gives it to the guy who has 10 times what he has. That's not equity, that's justice. You're not going to have equity in heaven. And yet people want to have equity on earth? In fact, let me ask you guys a question. How many people in here have adult brothers and sisters? Okay. You're brought up under the same roof, right? Let me ask you a question. Is your adult brother or sister in the same place you are right now, financially, spiritually, socially, economically, educationally? No. Why not? Was there some sort of discrimination? No, you're in the same house, raised by the same parents. You have the same opportunities, and you arrive at different places. Why? Because there's 1,000 different reasons why people arrive at different places. It's not all about discrimination. Yet there are some people out there who say all disparities are discrimination. No, they're not. You have different gifts. You have different desires. You have different work ethics. And yet people are trying to say we're all going for equity. Not even going to have it in heaven. If there is no God, you can't complain about injustice or evil. Why can't you complain about it? Because there is no injustice or evil unless God exists. What? How can that be? Well, C.S. Lewis, who early on in his life became an atheist. Why? Because he went through World War I. He lost his best friend in World War I, and he thought there can't be a good God. There's too much evil in the world. And then one day, with the help of Tolkien, who wrote the Lord of the Rings series, they were buddies, C.S. Lewis and Tolkien. Lewis realized his argument against God didn't work. And he ultimately put it in the book, Mere Christianity. Here's what he said. He realized that evil requires good and good requires God. He said this: as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You wouldn't know what a crooked line was unless you knew what a straight line was. You wouldn't know what injustice was unless you knew what justice was. Something can't be immoral unless something is. In other words, evil is a privation in good. It is a lack in a good thing. If there's no good, there can be no evil. In fact, evil is like cancer. If you take all the cancer out of a good body, you got a better body. What happens if you take all the body out of the cancer? You got nothing, right? Doesn't exist. In other words, evil can't exist on its own. It can only exist as a parasite in a good thing. Evil is like rust in a car. If you take all the rust out of a car, you got a better car. What happens if you take all the car out of the rust? You got a Pinto, all right? Doesn't exist on its own. Or we could put it this way: the shadows prove the sunshine. In order to have shadows, you have to have sunshine. In other words, in order to have evil, you have to have good. Oh, you can have sunshine without shadows. You can have good without evil, but you can't have shadows without sunshine. You can't have evil unless there's good. But good only exists in an objective way if God exists. So evil doesn't disprove God. Evil may prove there's a devil out there. But evil doesn't disprove God, because there'd be no such thing as evil unless there was good, and there'd be no such thing as good unless God existed. Are you guys with me so far? Okay, now, you can always ask the question, why does God allow certain evils? And maybe we can do that during the Q&A. But what you can't say, it means there is no God. Because evil wouldn't even exist unless good did exist. Now, let's go back to where we started with football for a second. Let me ask you a question. What does it mean to submit? Nobody likes this word, especially when it's in the Bible. You know, submit to your husbands and all this. Oh, we can't do that. That's bad. First of all, let's break the word up. Submission. What does mission mean? Mission means you have a goal. You're going somewhere. You have a direction. You're trying to accomplish something. Sub means that you are forgoing your own personal agendas for this big agenda, big mission. So going back to football, if there's some diva receiver on a team and he keeps telling the coach, you got to throw me the ball. You got to keep throwing me the ball. You got to keep throwing the ball. And the coach says, look, if we throw you the ball every time, we're not going to win. You'll get your chances, but we got to spread the ball around if we're going to win. Now, if the diva receiver says, you know, coach, you're right, I will forego my own personal agenda here for the good of the team, for the mission of the team, is that a good thing? Yes. Of course it is. Well, it's the same thing when it comes to life, ladies and gentlemen. If you got your own personal agenda, you want to go in this direction, but God says you ought to go in this direction, you'd be foolish to not go where God wants you to go. To submit yourself to eternity. That's where he's trying to take you. He's trying to conform you to the image of his Son. But you can grieve the Holy Spirit and go your own way. Submission is not a bad thing, especially when God is leading the mission. It's a good thing. And by the way, what is the purpose of life? Why are we even here? This is the interactive portion of the program. Why are we here? To get a bunch of stuff and then die? Read Ecclesiastes if you think that's the mission of life. Why are we here? You guys sound a lot like Charlie Brown's teacher right now. To glorify God. Where is that in the Bible? That's the Westminster Confession, and you're not even a Calvinist. What are you talking about? What does it mean to glorify God? What's that?
To be conformed to the image of his Son.
You just copied that from me.
I think the purpose is to be, we are to be Christ's bride. I think that's why
We're to be what, Larry?
Christ's bride.
Christ's bride. Okay, yeah. It's amazing how we got all these different opinions. This should be nailed down, shouldn't it? What does that mean? I think Jesus gives us the purpose of life when he's praying for us, as recorded in John 17. He's praying to the Father. In John 17:3, he says, now this is eternal life, that they, meaning us, because he's praying for us, that this is eternal life, that they may know you, God the Father, and Jesus Christ whom you've sent. The purpose of life is to know God, not just intellectually, not just believe that God exists. Remember we talked about that earlier? The purpose of life is to know him personally, to trust in him. And then when you add the Great Commission, it's to make him known, to know God and to make him known. That's why we're here. And you know God in a worshipful sense. You know God in a personal sense, not just an academic sense. Because even the demons know that God exists. And that's up to you. Now, what does that mean? If you think about this, sometimes the way you know God better is when you go through pain and suffering. But we, of course, as North Americans, all we want to do is avoid that, don't we? Isn't it interesting that the people that live under the poverty line worldwide hardly ever ask the question, if God, why evil? It's always us rich folk up here in North America who, when, Wi-Fi goes down, we go, oh, is there even a God? Why is that? A lack of perspective. All right, so let's try and sum these three arguments up. From the cosmological argument, we learn that there is a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent first cause. From the teleological argument, we also learn more that this being is intelligent and that he sustains the universe every single second it exists. And then from the moral argument, we see that this being is also morally perfect. So when you combine these three arguments, we get a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things to this very moment. This is the God of the Bible, yet we haven't opened the Bible yet. This is called natural theology. You don't need the Bible to know that God exists. You need the Bible, the documents in the Bible to know who Jesus was, but you don't need to know the Bible to know that there must be a creator and a sustainer who's moral, because you can just get that from what's called natural revelation. Natural theology. That's all we've been doing to this point. Now, some of you are probably thinking, okay, but don't atheists have good arguments against this? No. In fact, they've made argumentation impossible by their ideology of materialism, and we've briefly touched on this earlier. And C.S. Lewis said it better than anyone, that atheism makes reason itself impossible. And just to set this up again, in case you missed it earlier, and since it's after lunch now and you're in a sugar coma, remember that most atheists today are materialists. They believe that everything's just made of molecules. You're not a mind, you just have a brain. You don't have a soul, you just have a body. You're a molecular machine, a moist robot. Everything you do is the result of the laws of physics. You don't have free will, even though you think you do. Well, here's what Lewis says about that. It's a 2-slide quote, so stick with it. Here's what he says. Suppose there were no intelligence behind the universe. In that case, nobody designed my brain for the purpose of thinking. Thought is merely the byproduct of some atoms within my skull. But if so, how can I trust my own thinking to be true? But if I can't trust my own thinking, of course I can't trust the arguments leading to atheism and therefore have no reason to be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I can't believe in thought, so I can never use thought to disbelieve in God. Boom. You can't say it better than that. You can't use thought to disbelieve in God because the only reason your mind works is because there is a God. This is why John Lennox, the guy I mentioned to you before, says things like this to friends of his who are atheists in the academy. He'll say, how do you do science? And they'll start talking about machines. He goes, no, I don't mean out here. How do you do science up here? And they say, oh, you mean with my mind? They start to say mind and they catch themselves. Oh, you mean with my brain? He says, yeah, tell us the history of the brain. Well, my brain is the product of natural forces that didn't have its end in mind. And at that point, Lennox says, and you trust it? I mean, imagine if a computer was put together randomly by a tornado raging through Chilliwack here. Would you trust anything it told you? No. So why would you trust your mind if it was made by some sort of random process? You shouldn't. But you know you can trust your mind because you use it all the time. And it yields truth. So that's the effect now that you have to reason back to a cause with. Why can't I think? Why can't I know what's outside of my skull using my mind and my 5 senses? Why can't I do that? Because this world was created and is sustained by a mind. That's why. You're reasoning from effect back to cause. So, if we know that truth exists and we know that God exists, how do we know which God? Because so far we haven't gotten to Jesus. All we got is this creator, sustainer, moral God, right? Could be Allah, could be somebody else. Actually, it can't be Allah now. Allah's out. Why is Allah out at this point? Because according to Muslim scholars, Allah is morally arbitrary. Whatever Allah decides is good. Allah himself isn't good. He could dictate that rape tomorrow is good, and that would be just fine. So Allah can't be the moral standard. But how do we know it's the Christian God? For that, we got to go to point 3. Are miracles possible? Now, in order to talk about this, let me ask you guys a question. Let's say before there was any long-term communication, let's go back 500 years ago. If one king wanted to communicate with another king across a great distance, how would he do so? What could he send? He could send a message, and what would be on the message to indicate it came from the king? Right. There would be a seal on the message that would authenticate the messenger. Now, it would seem to me that that seal would have to have at least a couple of characteristics. Number one, it would have to be unique to the king, because if everybody had the seal, how would you know it came from the king, right? And number two, it'd have to be difficult to forge, because if you could forge it, then you could send false messages from the king. Well, this is exactly what miracles do in the Bible. Miracles are like a seal from the ultimate king. What they do is they authenticate the person speaking. How is God going to tell everybody that, say, Moses speaks for him? Because he's going to pour miracles out on Moses. Or Jesus. Why trust Jesus? Because Jesus can do miracles. In other words, if you look at the reason that miracles are done in the Bible, they're never done for entertainment purposes. Miracles are done in the Bible because the miracle confirms the message, the sign confirms the sermon. Now, how many miracles are there in the Bible, approximately? Does anyone know? A lot. Good answer. No. How many? Huh? 500. I hear 500. Higher or lower, anyone?
Higher. Thousands.
1000s, I hear. Anyone else? The number of miracles in the Bible are about 250, okay? It depends on how you count them. Some of them are bunched up. But let's just take them from Abraham to Jesus. I know there's miracles each side of that, but that's the bulk of the miracle working between those two people. And that spans about 2,000 years, from about 2000 BC to Jesus' time. Now, if you have 250 miracles over 2,000 years, how often do you get a miracle? Homeschoolers, help us out here. Every 8 years. Man, I heard like 10, 4 times. We got to start teaching. Oh, that's just your math. I'm sorry, I forgot. Okay. 250 into 2,000 is 8, right? So you get 1 miracle every 8 years. Does that sound like a lot of miracles? No. There's not a lot of miracles actually in the Bible. But by the way, do they come once every 8 years? No, where are they? They're bunched. When God is doing miracles through people, he's doing miracles in these 3 basic time periods. Moses, Elijah and Elijah, and Jesus and the apostles. Why? Because these people have new revelation that needs new confirmation. There's a new message that needs a new miracle. There's a new sermon that needs a new sign. Why trust Moses? Because Moses can do miracles. How about Elijah and Elijah? Because they can do miracles. How about Jesus and the apostles? Because they can do miracles. You know, there's periods in the Bible where there's miracles. Where there's nothing going on for like hundreds of years. When we read the Bible, we think miracles are occurring every 10 minutes. They're not. They're rare even in the Bible. Now, here's the problem. Some people believe miracles are impossible. Like, for example, Noah. All right, is this being recorded? This is being recorded? Can we just keep this amongst ourselves? All right, can we all agree that Noah and the ark is crazy? Come on, admit it. Crazy. And the resurrection of Jesus. I already asked you guys, has anyone seen one? Nobody said yes. That seems crazy too. And for some reason, the big problem miracle in the Bible is Jonah. Is that a whale of a tail or a tail of a whale? I mean, what is the deal with Jonah? Can you actually believe in Jonah? That seems crazy, doesn't it? Well, what is the greatest miracle in the Bible?
The resurrection of Jesus.
No, the resurrection's easy. The greatest miracle in the Bible is... I got some of you a second time. The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible, right? I mean, if God can create the whole show out of nothing, can he resurrect Jesus from the dead? Can he part the Red Sea? Can he make axe heads float in water? Can he do any of these things? Of course he can. Here's the interesting thing. Even atheists are admitting the evidence for Genesis 1:1. Now, they don't think it's God, but what else could it be? We've already been through this. It's got to be a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator when you put together all the arguments. So if Genesis 1:1 is true, every other verse in the Bible is at least possible. You can't rule it out. And yet so many people just rule it out at the outright. They go, no, it can't be, it's a miracle. That's a philosophical bias. That's against the evidence, actually. The evidence shows the greatest miracle has already occurred. In fact, when people say, I don't believe in miracles, I say, look around, you're living in one. This whole universe is a miracle. Now, I said something a couple of minutes ago that if God can create the universe out of nothing, he can do whatever he wants. It's not logically impossible. And some of you are going, what's this logically impossible stuff? I thought God can do anything. No. There's even some things God can't do. He can't do logically impossible things. Like what? Like he can't create a square circle. Doesn't exist. Can't create a one-ended stick. Doesn't exist. Can't create a married bachelor. I know some guys try, but no. Doesn't exist. Can't create a 5-sided triangle. Doesn't exist. Can't create an honest politician. I mean, come on, there are some things that are just too hard for God. In fact, there are things you can do that God can't do, like what? Lie. If he were to lie, he wouldn't be God. He wouldn't be the standard of truth. He can't go out of existence. He's the ground of all reality. Of course he can't go out of existence. He can't change. What's he going to change from? He's already a perfect being. Any change would necessitate a move from perfection to imperfection. No, there's plenty of things God can't do that you can do. Those are the things that make him God. When we say that God is all-powerful, we don't mean he's powerful to do the illogical or to violate his nature. What we mean, he can do all things that are possible in accord with his nature. Now, a lot of people don't believe in miracles because they've never seen one. Now, that's not a good reason to disbelieve something. Why? Because you believe in a lot of things you've never seen. Right? You believe in your mind. Have you ever seen it? Yeah, you're using it right now, I hope. You believe in the laws of logic and the laws of mathematics. Have you ever seen those? No, you use them every day, and you've never seen them. You believe in justice. Have you ever seen justice? Oh, you may have seen people being treated justly or unjustly, but you've never seen justice in itself because it's not something you see. It's an immaterial reality grounded in the nature of God. In fact, I just interviewed Justin Brierley yesterday. He's a guy from the UK who does a lot of great podcasts and just wrote a book called The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, even among atheists. And he had a Twitter interaction with an atheist who said, you know, there is no immaterial reality, everything's made of molecules. And Justin went and looked at the guy's Twitter handle, and he had all sorts of rights associated with his Twitter handle, like I believe in LGBTQ rights and all this. And Justin just said to him, those are immaterial realities. You just told me there is nothing immaterial. You're stealing from God while you're arguing against him, right? There are no rights if there's no God. That's an immaterial reality. Justice is immaterial. It's not something made of molecules. You don't find justice in your workshop in a drawer, right? You've never seen love. And everyone believes in love. Oh, you may have seen people loved, you may have been loved, but you've never seen it in itself because it's not a material thing. In fact, in the second debate with Christopher Hitchens, some kid at the college in New Jersey asked Christopher this question: Christopher, what is love? And Christopher, being a materialist, had to come up with a materialistic answer. So after he hemmed and hawed a little bit, he finally said, love is a chemical. And I said to him, don't tell that to your wife. Honey, do you love me? Yeah. Why? Because I got the chemical today. And tomorrow I might not have it, all right? Well, love is not a chemical. It's a decision to seek what's best for the other person, and it's grounded in the nature of God, but it's not something you see. It's immaterial. You've never seen gravity. Oh, Frank, there it is right there. Nope. You're not seeing gravity. What are you seeing? You're seeing the effects of gravity. And we don't even know what gravity is. Did you know that? You've never seen energy. Never seen it. We see its effects. Scientists don't even know what energy is. It's a lot of things that you've never seen that you believe in. You've never seen Aristotle, yet you believe he existed. Why? Because he's left effects behind that are best explained by a guy who lived in 400 BC. You've never seen Jesus in the flesh, yet you believe he existed because he's left effects behind. So there's a lot of things that you believe in that you've never seen. And if miracles are possible, and they are, and the greatest miracle has already occurred, the creation of the universe out of nothing, then miracles are indeed possible, even if you've never seen one. And do you realize that if there haven't been any miracles since the New Testament, Christianity is still true? Now, I think there have been miracles since then. In fact, Craig Keener, who is a brilliant researcher at Asbury Seminary, in 2011 released a hernia-inducing 2-volume set, 1,100 pages of evidence of modern-day miracles. And you can get that resource if you want to look at it. But even if Keener is wrong, even if all that evidence is wrong and there haven't been any miracles since Jesus and the apostles, Christianity is still true. Do you know what the atheists have to believe? The atheists have to believe that every single miracle claim and spiritual experience in the history of the world has been mistaken. Is that possible? It's possible. Is it reasonable to believe? No, I don't think so. That's a huge bar to get over. To say every single one throughout history has been wrong about this stuff? Even demonic stuff, that's all been wrong? No, I don't think so. And by the way, even if miracles do occur today, you ought not expect to see many of them. Why? Because if miracles occurred routinely, they would not get our attention as special acts of God. I mean, can you imagine if people rose from the dead routinely? What would the resurrection of Christ mean? Nothing. You go to somebody and you go, hey, Jesus rose from the dead to prove he was God. And the guy goes, so what? Uncle Leroy just rose from the dead 2 weeks ago. Now I got to give the inheritance back. No, it's got to be a rare event. It's not a regular event if it's going to get our attention. But you know what else we have to keep in mind? That even regular events are amazing. And there's a mind behind them. How many people in here have seen your own flesh and blood born? Every mother should raise your hand. It's only the men I'm asking now. Now, when you see your own flesh and blood either come out of you or another human being, you don't go, evolution! You go, this is amazing. How did this happen? We made whoopee 9 months ago. Now look at this. You realize there's design behind all this. Now, births happen every single day. And we get so jaded by them, we don't call them miraculous, but we need to wake up. Even stuff that happens every day points to God. This is why biologist Ariel Roth said God never did a miracle to convince an atheist because his ordinary works do a sufficient job of that. Just look at the person right next to you right now. Why is that person even conscious? After that sugar-laden lunch we had. No, I mean, why is this person a free agent who you can have a discussion with? I mean, how does this happen? You know, one of the great atheists today is, great meaning he's well known, is Daniel Dennett, who says that consciousness is an illusion. One wonders if he was conscious when he said that. It's crazy. So, yes, miracles are possible. The greatest miracle of all has already occurred. The only question is, has the miracle known as the resurrection occurred? And we're going to get to that in just a minute.